All right, we've got one of the craziest vulnerabilities that I've seen all year. It's one of the easiest to exploit, and it seems like the vendor isn't doing a whole lot about it, and it seems like the vulnerable orgs aren't patching that fast either. Who remembers Heartbleed? If you weren't around back then, or if you just don't remember it, Heartbleed was this gnarly vulnerability that with a single HTTP request, you could get a web server to dump its memory back to you. Lots of things are held in memory. At the time, one of the things that was held in memory that everyone was worried about with Heartbleed was the signing key for your SSL certificate. So how Heartbleed was exploited was, let's go dump the memory of the server, grab the private key part of the whole SSL exchange, and now I can decrypt traffic to that server. I'm wildly oversimplifying, but a few years ago, Citrix had a very similar vulnerability, and of course, everyone started calling it Citrix Bleed. But at the time when the vulnerability came out, it was said to only impact Citrix NetScaler devices that had their management interface exposed to the internet. So a lot of major Citrix customers and organizations weren't that worried around this original vulnerability because they do the right thing and don't expose their management interface to the internet. But fast forward to a few weeks ago, and some words got removed from the vulnerability description. And the words that got removed were management interface. So what do we've got? We've got Citrix Bleed 2 Electric Bungaloo. Hat tip to Kevin Beaumont, Gossy the dog, if you follow him on social media. Kevin's the GOAT, and he's got a series of blog posts going back to June 24th about Citrix Bleed, but I've got updates as of this week that I really just was like, okay, it's time to make a video about this. Come on, it's even got a logo. Come on, vulnerabilities with names and logos are obviously more severe and we should pay closer attention to them, right? So as I alluded to, the NetScaler management interface is the verbiage that was removed from the CVE description. What does that mean? It means that this vulnerability, which is incredibly easy to exploit, that just like Heartbleed with a single request will dump memory, also impacts all of the NetScaler devices that are just configured as a gateway or a AAA virtual server. So if your organization uses Citrix to remotely access devices, which I know places that I've worked definitely had this setup, you are vulnerable to Citrix Bleed as well. So the thing that was really funny about this when it came out was I saw this screenshot on Kevin's blog of Shodan searching for the favicon of this NetScaler gateway, and it showed like 56,000 results. And I remember reading this like the day that he wrote the blog or maybe the day after. And I was like, surely now that this vulnerability is being discussed so widely and publicly, I'm going to go on Shodan and that number is going to have drastically reduced, right? Right? Chat, right? No, this is a live shot of Shodan right now. This happened a few weeks ago when I pulled it up too. I was like, okay, let me pull up Shodan, rerun his search. And the number went up and now we are a few weeks later and the number has continued to go up. So we've got like 50, 60,000 boxes on the internet that are potentially vulnerable to this vulnerability. And if you're interested in intel about how the threat actors and the hackers out there might already be using information like this vulnerability against your organization and you want to get a look behind the scenes of that chat, you're going to want to check out the sponsor of today's video. I am very excited to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Flare. They're a threat and exposure management platform that you could use to figure out if the real threat actors, the real hackers out there are talking about you and your data. They collect intel that lets you see how these threat actors actually work and operate behind the scenes. So say you're worried about one of the vulnerabilities that I talk about in these videos, and you want to see, are hackers talking about my company and this vulnerability in their dark web chats, their forums? Are they talking in Telegram? Well, Flare monitors over 18,000 different Telegram chats, hundreds of dark web marketplaces, and they have over 70 million info stealer logs, and they add over 1 million every week. That makes them the best info stealer data set in the entire industry. Say, for example, you're worried that you were exposed for this whole Citrix Bleed vulnerability. You could come to Flare and see if threat actors are talking about your company, sessions and creds being stolen using this vulnerability, and you can get ahead of it before it turns into a full-blown incident or something like ransomware. This is also continuous exposure management and intel. This isn't a one-off snapshot. So this is going to help you set up alerts, prioritize, and detect sensitive information being talked about in the wild before the attackers get a chance to leverage that information. Now, I know some of you watching this are probably curious, is my data already out there? So if you want to see if any of your credentials are out there for sale right now, sign up for a free trial of Flare using the link in the description below. Thank you, Flare, for supporting the channel. Let's get back to it. All right, thank you to Flare. Back to it. Let's start to describe how this vulnerability actually works, and then I want to talk about all of the active exploitation that we're seeing over the past couple of weeks since this initial blog came out. So just like Heartbleed of years past, this is an out of bounds read. We're going to shove a bunch of information in this HTTP request, and then we're going to tell this NetScaler box that the response should be of a certain size. That is us lying to the NetScaler box about the size the response should be. Instead of just coming back with whatever the HTTP request asks for, it's going to just continue searching in memory until it hits a certain spot and then return all of that. Things that are generally in memory are cryptographic keys, the private ones, so that if I grab them, I can decrypt everything from now on. There's also going to be creds, PII, all sorts of stuff that's just being temporarily held in memory, was never meant to be sent back over the wire to you, especially over some random HTTP request. So spoiler and skipping ahead of what you should do to fix this if you are a Citrix customer is obviously please quickly identify either via that Shodan thing or via your own records, whatever you're running and where you're running it. You're going to want to identify all of your internet exposed Citrix NetScaler boxes. Definitely patch, definitely terminate the sessions. But we're going to want, at this point, while I'm recording this video, we're going to want to assume compromise, and you're going to want to rotate any secret that could have been in memory on that box at any point. So we're talking key rotation. We're talking cred and admin cred rotation. You're going to want to kill all active sessions because all of those session cookies could have been leaked. This was the Shodan search that I ran that I saw that 59,000 number. You could even specify your specific org on Shodan to see if you have any boxes that Shodan can see. All right, this is the first blog that Kevin wrote, and it said, has this been exploited yet? And up until very recently, Citrix was denying any exploitation. But as he points out, even 2 years ago when Citrix Bleed 1 happened, they said the same thing. Spoiler alert, this is not true. I'm going to go through 2 more blogs that Kevin wrote that outlines that there is very active exploitation. So active exploitation blog number 1. This was written July 8th, just a few days ago, last week. He wrote about the vuln initially on June 24th. I want to just establish a timeline for you guys. If you go read these blogs below, or you can see on the screen while I'm talking, Kevin is just lighting up Citrix throughout them on this entire response effort from them. All right, so at this point, July 8th, we still have Citrix saying they have found no evidence to indicate that any of these things have been compromised. There's no evidence to suggest exploitation. They're also saying that this new vulnerability is not related to the old vulnerability. What Kevin's saying is like, hey, the impact is exactly the same. The user's token is completely visible in memory. And here we have a screenshot from Horizon 3 that did some research on this. They're running their POC script against a vulnerable NetScaler server, and then you could just straight up see cookie session token that you could just grab and replay this session token and completely assume that person's account, whether or not they have two-factor on, whether or not anything. Here's their authenticated session cookie. So just driving the point home on impact, this is completely unauthenticated. You can spray the internet. People are spraying the internet to this authentication endpoint. In the responses, you can suck up valid cookies and then establish Citrix remote desktop sessions. Or if you're lucky enough, on the session that comes back, you can just hijack an active NetScaler admin session and do whatever the hell you want as an admin on that NetScaler box. This is just one threat example. As he points out, memory is full of juicy information. So Gray Noise, a great threat intel vendor, friend of the show, is now looking at all of their honeypot data. They're finding tons of exploitation going back from this, so I don't know what Citrix is talking about. They're seeing hits from IPs going back to July 1st. Kevin also mentions that going back to June 23rd, they're starting to see some stuff. Here, you can see the little bump on June 23rd, then you can see some more bumps July 1st. And then going on into July 8th, this is extremely active exploitation. Here's some example threat actor IPs that are actively exploiting this that you can check against. It's not an exhaustive list, obviously. Threat hunting for this in your logs, you're going to want to look for this do authentication.do endpoint. The way that Heartbleed works, the way that this works is it can give the attacker a number of bytes beyond the actual request. So you can actually filter by size of response on this data. As he points out, legit requests are going to be in here, but you're going to be looking for outliers in terms of volume. So here's a POC of the actual request in action. So a post request to this do authentication endpoint. And you can just see in this initial value field right here, they're just responding with raw RAM data. Kevin's got a GitHub with a bunch of useful info on this as well. I love overflow vulnerabilities because look at this. It looks like you're just screaming at the machine. Come on, I can't scroll for this entire time, but I'm screaming into the HTTP request, and then here's my exploit. So if you want to use this curl request to test if your Netscaler box is vulnerable, you can just grab this curl command with all these A's in it. You can scream at your own box. You're going to want to replace this 1234 with your IP address. And then if we go back to when he started screaming at this machine, you can actually see that he has instructions on how to tell if you're vulnerable or not. So if you see a server error, you're all good. If you see a bunch of text, including sessions, then you're definitely vulnerable. He's also tracking the raw patching data that he can find scanning the entire internet. It's actually too big of a file for GitHub to even show. But if you're curious, he found every box that he could, and this file marks if it's currently vulnerable or not vulnerable. You can go in here and search for your own domains or your own organizations if you want. Like I said, Kevin lights Citrix up this entire blog. He's just saying hey, they're not giving us any technical information here. They're leaving customers out high and dry, having no idea how to check if they're already exploited. Great, they can patch, but they have no idea what to do to figure out if they were already owned. Because this is such an easy to exploit vulnerability. I mean, you saw the curl request that I just gave you. You just send that HTTP request, you get memory back. It's a literal one command run exploitation. This isn't like legit POC, needs some elite hacker to exploit type stuff. So like he's saying, exploitation happened pretty much right after patch release. So providing no technical information is not slowing down exploitation. He also mentioned something about WAF rules, but that's even funnier in the next blog that he wrote, we're going to get to in a second. And like that big file showed, Kevin is tracking patching. At the time of this second blog post on July 8th, 24% of orgs that were publicly vulnerable still hadn't applied patches. This includes some of the world's biggest companies and the NSA. Great. Okay, and on the third post, and this is when I said, okay, I got to make a video about this. Situation update, everybody is already owned. TLDR on this entire video, on this entire post is everybody gets a Citrix Netscaler incident. You get an incident, you get an incident, everyone gets an incident. From the good news, I suspect most orgs that are still vulnerable to this are lacking in logs to have any evidence that they are exploited, so they can go on and just pretend like nothing is wrong because they cannot prove otherwise. That is a very, very sad good news section. We showed in the last post, exploitation is super easy and it just looks like a regular HTTP request. So exploitation activity does not actually leave that much in terms of like artifacts or noise for you to hunt off of. So Kevin was tracking this exploitation really closely, and he's noticing that there's a ton of exploitation traffic coming from China-based threat actors. They are targeting by sector: tech, legal, education, legal, financial services, government, the UN, and telecoms. Their exploitation goes all the way back to June 20th. So if you're keeping a timeline in your head, this is well before the vulnerability even dropped. This is not a spray and pray thing. That's not China's MO, right? They are very careful in selecting their victims. They're profiling the Netscaler box before attacking it to try to make sure it's a real box, trying to not fall for the honeypots like Grey Noise has out there. Kevin is tracking 128 confirmed active organizations who are victims. He can tell in the telemetry that threat actors are on those boxes. In some of those 128, traffic to the Netscaler boxes is still sustained to this day. He did talk to one of the victims who spoke to him anonymously. This is great intel here for what you can expect if you are a victim of this vulnerability. He said the threat actor that they were responding to was focused on data collection from using Citrix sessions that they were able to steal out of this memory. And then their MO was to try to maintain persistence once they got through, say they grabbed a session, remote controlled into a box. Now they wanted to maintain persistence on that box through installing legitimate MSP admin tools. Think AnyDesk or something like that they were probably trying to install. The scariest sentence in the blog post, they triggered no alerts in their entire security stack. And this is someone that Kevin knows, who obviously is responding to this incident. So they do have a security team. I know a lot of orgs are just like underfunded, don't have a team, don't have a threat hunting team. Based on this conversation, it sounds like this person knows what they're talking about, are responding to this incident, and they still did not have any alerts triggered based on this vulnerability. That's nuts and terrifying. Again, here's some IPs that you can check your logs to see for indicators of compromise. China go burr. Because this activity appears to be covert, I strongly suspect most orgs aren't going to be aware that they were a victim. Not fun. This is why I'm making the video. I'm trying to get awareness out there. if people watch this and can find their organizations on that list of currently vulnerable victims, they have to assume compromise. So China went brr, Russia goes bloop, beep, beep. Of course, there's some ransomware groups out of Russia that Kevin is noticing some activity beyond. He said, for the most part, though, based on dark web chatter, most ransomware groups appear to not understand how to exploit this vulnerability yet. So banging the drums publicly for patching has likely lessened the operational risk substantially by simply getting out ahead of people learning how to do a pretty simple string of exploitation. No joke. Like I said, this is one curl request. So that's China, that's Russia. Now we've got e-crime. Some known cyber crime groups are actually doing the whole spraying and praying thing. So China being a little bit covert, they're probing, they're trying to not trip honeypots. And then we've got cybercrime that are just going nuts. 12 million attacked attempts. They're spraying this request everywhere. 40% of those 12 million are aimed at financial services. Here's the WAF part that's kind of funny. So this data is coming from Imperva, obviously a WAF company. So I want to jump ahead to the WAF part. So this is from netscaler.com that says, can I fix these vulnerabilities using a web app firewall? They said no. And Kevin's like, well, that might be news to Akamai and Imperva, who absolutely have rules for this right now. And then just the biggest facepalm of this entire incident. Kevin says, you can absolutely detect this with a web app firewall. The only major vendor who doesn't yet detect this is Citrix, who does sell a WAF solution, upsell for Netscaler, and they haven't covered their own vulnerability for some reason. This is the most insane part of this entire blog to me. So they're out there saying, no, a WAF cannot stop this. Yet some of the biggest WAF vendors out there are publicly saying, no, here's our rule for this. And when Kevin did some digging, the only major WAF solution on the planet, apparently, that doesn't have a rule for this very significant and easy to exploit vulnerability is Citrix themselves. Big egg on your face moment here. They've gone silent in the last couple weeks about this whole thing, which is also just like a very weird way to respond. They did finally acknowledge exploitation. Apparently, CISA forced that issue by adding it to the KEV, the known exploited vulnerabilities database. And then continued embarrassment. They say they continue to question claims in this blog post. They say that the NIST description of the vulnerability was wrong, and the most accurate description of the vulnerability can be found on their website. But what they didn't mention was the NIST website description was submitted by Citrix. NIST did not write the description. Citrix did. On their own support portal, they say, hey, this is how to patch the vulnerability, run these commands. However, this doesn't say clear all session cookies, which are leaked by the vulnerabilities, which you absolutely need to do even after you run all those commands. So if you're a Citrix customer, you listen to their patch instructions, you are still at risk for session hijacking for the period of time that you were vulnerable. And like I said, Kevin is updating this. And as recording this right now, because I'm recording it on the date that he updated it, almost 4,000 orgs are still vulnerable. You should read that as probably owned, because if you're still vulnerable at this point for a vulnerability that is this easy to exploit, you definitely have an incident on your hands already. All right, this is one of those ones that I'm going to ask you not to share because I want my YouTube channel to succeed or anything. This is one of those ones that I would like to share to get to those 4,000 orgs. This is a very serious vulnerability being actively exploited by every major threat actor that you can think of at this point, which is not going to slow down. It's only going to get worse. So please share this one around to your fellows that work in Blue Team, in threat hunting, in a SOC. I want to get this one in front of cybersecurity practitioners that might not know about this vulnerability, that are running Citrix, and they don't even realize that they're vulnerable to this right now because Citrix's communication to this has been insufficient. Thank you, Kevin Beaumont, for all the great research. As you saw, while he was writing those blogs, he was researching dark web chatter and threat actor chatter to see how they were getting along with exploitation. That is why you should check out Flare in the link below. That is exactly what they are built to help with. Using that free trial link is a great way to support the channel and tell these sponsors that I'm worth sponsoring. And I'm in a pretty cool position right now to be turning down sponsors, so I'm only taking ones that I think would actually be useful to you guys. And Flare's the real deal. If you're not already subscribed, please do that. Hit the bell, all that kind of stuff. I really appreciate the support, and follow for more cybersecurity news.